You can take my drone out of my cold, dead hands. Hey, it's your pal Ken here to give you the skinny on a few of the more finer points of the new FAA proposed drone ID legislation. So yes, I've read the whole thing and it sucks. And it seems especially designed to screw over hobbyists. But I'll get into the specifics here in just a little bit. First, I want to invite everyone to click on the link in the description and read this thing for yourself. There's a guy named Ben Walsh who is with the Flight Technologies and Procedures Division for the FAA, and I've invited him to be a guest on Thursday Night Live. I've asked the FAA in the past to be guests on the show, and they have replied with, well, it's our policy not to get involved in that kind of thing. But I very simply said in the email to him that since this affects the public at large, that it might be a good thing for him to come on and kind of be a representative of our government and explain what's going on from the government's perspective. Think I'll get a reply? Probably not. The language of this thing is just very ambiguous, and it's subjective in many areas, and that's intentional for the benefit of other parties, Jeff Bezos, and other people and companies that would benefit greatly from how this is currently worded. But I will say that I do agree we do need some sort of ID system, like a digital license plate for drones. We just do. We have automobiles driving on our public roads, and they have license plates. And drones flying in the public airspace, they need some sort of digital license plate as well. But the way they're going about it, let me just begin here. All UAS, unmanned aerial systems, produced for operation in the airspace of the United States would have to comply with the design and production requirements established in this proposal, with exceptions for amateur-built UAS of the United States government and unmanned aircraft that weigh less than 0.55 pounds. Well, at first that sounds like great news. With exceptions for amateur-built UAS, that means a lot of fixed wing, some aerial photography drones, and most FPV drones. But is it good news, really? This is where the language is vague. You're going to see the word exceptions all throughout this document. All throughout. And that leaves it very subjective to benefit not us, the drone community. No, this is going to benefit big business, the people that want to send the tube socks in our airspace. And you better believe that if remote ID is put into place, the government and big business will be able to see where we are. They're going to be able to see exactly where Timmy and Bobby and you are flying your drone in the airspace. But will we be able to see what they're doing? Will we be able to see where the Amazon drones are in the sky? No, it's going to be essentially a one-way mirror. Alexa, who is Jeff Bezos?
Jeff Bezos is evil incarnate and shouldn't be trusted as far as you can throw him.
Something else you need to be concerned with is what will happen to the Lance system, which is just now hitting its stride and starting to work for everyone. Well, the remote ID would perform the service that it needs to under contract with the FAA based on the same model the FAA currently uses for Lance. What does that mean? Well, if you know the government at all, you know that they loathe redundancy. So they're going to have two systems? No, they're going to do away with Lance if this goes through. Are you concerned yet? Well, you should be. And I encourage you to please take your time and at least skim through the document, because some of the things that I'm picking out for you today are just part of other parts of the proposal that are just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. For instance, all UAS operators would be required to comply regardless of whether they conduct recreational, hobbyists, or commercial operations. All UAS produced for operation in the airspace of the United States would have to comply with the design and production requirements established in this proposal, with exceptions for amateur-built UAS of the United States government, and unmanned aircraft that weigh less than 0.55 pounds. Yay, I just bought the Mavic Mini, the outlaw drone. I can do what I want. No, you can't. Even those drones under 0.55 pounds must be registered. And if you're going to use them to make money, you will have to be certified under 14 CFR Part 107. And you heard right, everyone would have to comply with the design and production requirements except the United States government. All right, now we're going to get into some real nitty-gritty. Applicability. The FAA is proposing that, with limited exceptions, all UAS produced for the operation in the United States would be required to be designed and produced to meet performance requirements. Oh my God, what do I do with the 10 drones I already have? Don't worry, you can fly those in the FAA-provided drone detention centers. But how will they actually do the technology involved with these digital license plates? How will that happen? That technology is still being developed right now. That's why this, if it's passed, won't go into practice until, I don't know, 2023 or 25. And when they finally do decide on a standardized way of transmitting, the FAA considered, but is not proposing, to use the unmanned aircraft registration number instead of a serial number as the UAS identification. Which actually makes sense because the registration number can change over the life of an aircraft. So they want to use your serial number. Is that private information? I would say yes. But don't worry, that information will be transmitted to a third party that you then have to subscribe to on a monthly basis. Kind of like credit cards. And we know nothing ever goes wrong with your credit card information, right? Never. The FAA anticipates a UAS would be designed to broadcast and transmit as appropriate its serial number regardless of whether the unmanned aircraft has been registered or not. So drone manufacturers would be required to foot the cost for putting this additional technology in there that would be a passive system that would tell everybody who and where you are, even if you don't want them to know. UAS ID versus Session ID. UAS ID would transmit your information directly from the drone. Session ID would transmit from your drone through the internet to a third party. According to this proposed legislation, this would provide a layer of operational privacy. Bullshit! Sorry about that. Had to get some air. Funneling all of your information to a third-party middleman would just create a middleman that has way too much information about you. The FAA in this document already recognizes potential risks. In the correspondence between serial number and session ID section of the document, the FAA considers that the UAS identification should be required to be identical because of a lack of consistency regarding the message element. Could create confusion as to who is flying in the airspace of the United States. They're right, it could. If the broadcast message and the transmission to the remote ID USS, the third-party people with all of your information, contain different UAS identifications, it may potentially appear as if there are two different aircraft in the same airspace instead of one in a particular location. There's so much ambiguity in this document that should concern each and every one of us, even if you're not reading the entire thing. Just go through it. Just skim it as you would a boring book, because this thing is so boring. But it's so very important to try to at least get a working understanding of what they're trying to do here. And comment. There's a link in the description of where you can voice your opinion on this, and please do. All right, now we're getting into some stuff that really just sticks in my craw. I don't know what a craw is, but this is sticking right in there. It's the self-testing and monitoring section, which would require UAS with remote identification to automatically test the remote identification functionality when your drone is powered on to notify the person manipulating the flight controls of the UAS of the result of the test. Here's where everybody's getting bent out of shape, and for good reason, because you might not be able to use your drone in rural areas according to this. They continue, and listen very closely. The FAA is proposing to prohibit these drones from taking off if the remote identification equipment is not fully functional. You heard right. Since a person would only be allowed to operate a standard remote identification UAS or limited remote identification UAS if its remote identification equipment is functional. In other words, the better connectivity you have, the better locations you can fly in. No connectivity, no drone with this capability, then you're relegated to drone prison camps, essentially. And I like this sentence. This notification requirement would help operators comply with the operating requirements of proposed Part 89. They don't want to hobble your drone if you don't have connectivity. They want to help you. I love the wording of this. The more I read, the more angry I get. And I think you will understand the frustration. If you see the comments in this video and my previous videos, you'll understand the frustration of people when they're reading this or even hearing about it third hand. Do something about this. Make your voice heard. Link in the description. Moving on. There will be 3 flavors of remote identification: standard, limited, and none. Standard remote identification would require the most hoops to jump through, but would allow you to fly in the coolest places. They are also proposing that people operating a drone within the airspace of the United States other than within FAA recognized identification areas, drone detention camps, would be prohibited from doing so unless the UAS meets the requirements of the rule. Prohibited. Prohibited. There's a lot of that word in this document. Prohibited. And heck, the FAA understands that there are concerns about the impact that connecting to the internet directly from unmanned aircraft could have on networks that use radio frequency spectrum, including interference, network stability, and other effects. The FAA seeks comments on these potential effects, recognizing that issues of interference or other impacts on communications networks are independently reviewed by the FCC. And even though the words FAA seeks feedback only appear twice in this document, they really do want to hear from you. So how do we do that? Well, you go to the link in the description of this video, and that will bring you here to where you can view the document. And then you just go up to the green tab there where it says submit a formal comment, click on it, and you can type your lovely message right in there. But please use restraint. As fun as it might be, try not to write stuff like, "You guys are dicks." Man, we'll just back that up there. "Anarchy over tyranny." Maybe not. "You can take my drone out of my cold, dead hands." The FAA will also accept file uploads through this portal. However, I must advise Restraint, as tempting as it may be, to send them a nice photo or a file that you specially prepared for them. It's not accepted. I tried. So the best thing to do is just go through the document, fill out all your name, your organization, where you're from, your address, your DNA sample, your cheek swab, all that stuff. But remember that you are filling out a document in an official capacity. In conclusion, I would take all of this with a grain of salt. I would say, don't panic yet, but do be diligent in voicing your opinion, letting them know how you feel, because after all, we are the public. We are in control of those who are in control of our airspace, so we deserve to be a part of this. Let me read this comment that was made on a previous video from Lyle in Georgia. He says, "Remember back in the late 70s when we heard that cable TV was coming and that we would have to pay to watch TV shows? Remember the outrage at the mere idea of having to pay for television and the fact that providers would be able to track your viewing habits? Many swore they would never ever watch TV again and that it would be the end of television as we know it. Well, here we are in 2020, and in hindsight, wasn't that worry kind of short-sighted and silly?" Good point, Lyle, and thank you for commenting. I look forward to reading all of your comments. Feel free to use exclamation points liberally, but my advice is to contain all of that rage and concern and direct it towards the FAA in the form of your communication with them. You have until March 2nd to tell them how you feel, so do it. Do it! Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I appreciate each and every one of you being a responsible member of the drone community. Don't forget, there's a live show on this channel every Thursday night at 7 p.m. where we're going to have more experts to talk about this developing situation. Until then, buh and bye. Oh, if you have a chance, look for the operating scenario examples They're hilariously unrealistic. Kim decides to give her daughter Emily a UAS for her birthday. Emily, excited to finally have her own drone, eagerly unwraps the package so she can begin taking aerial selfies. Under FAA rules, Emily's discovered that she's completely screwed and can't fly it, so she returns it for a refund. Sorry, Emily.